Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Farhan Yunus, General Secretary of Open Silicon Valley. Our webinar today, titled Realities of Investing in Pakistan, is part of our Invest in Pakistan series, an initiative that Open Silicon Valley started about a year ago. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. The format of webinar today is we have a very special guest today, and our host Asif Alam will be talking to him for the first 40 minutes, and the last 20 minutes will be Q&A session. Please type your questions in the Q&A window in Zoom. We'll answer your questions towards the end in the last 20 minutes. We have three draws that will be happening today. One lucky winner will get membership to Open Silicon Valley. One lucky winner will get a 30-minute one-on-one conversation with a Silicon Valley-backed startup founder. And one lucky winner will get a one-on-one conversation on go-to-market strategies with our very own Asif Alam. So in order for us to consider you for each one of those three draws, I would recommend in the chat window, please type in your name, your location, and which particular draw would you like to participate in. After the webinar, we'll send out an email informing all the lucky winners of which draw they qualified for. So to get started, we have a very special guest today who has been playing a pivotal role in developing the startup ecosystem in Pakistan, and his company is at the forefront of digital change in Pakistan. I will leave the details to our distinguished host, Asif Alam. Asif is the managing partner of Arbitrium Technology, and he is an authority on all things Fintech. So Asif, all yours.
Thank you very much, Farhan. Aamir, it's a pleasure to be talking to you from this good, bright, sunny day in California. Before we start, let me take a few minutes to introduce Aamir to everybody. Aamir has been a CEO of Jazz since 2016, Pakistan's largest telecom and internet company with a whopping 63 million subscribers and one of the country's largest businesses. He's also a member of Global Executive Committee of VEON, which is the 9th largest telecom operator in the world. Prior to the current role, Aamir has held senior roles, leadership roles in VEON, Telenor Group, Ford, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Mobilink. His career spans 25 years, 7 countries, and industries as diverse as telecom, automotive, and financial services. Aamir received his bachelor's from the University of Texas, Austin. He holds an MBA from IMD in Switzerland and also has a diploma from Harvard Business School. More to the economy now, Aamir has been credited in creating and launching the Jazz brand in 1999, Pakistan's first prepaid mobile service, which today is the country's largest indigenous consumer brand. In addition to his expertise in marketing, Aamir has broad-based strengths in strategy, business dev, government relationships, and operations. In 2015, Aamir led the Mobilink-Warid merger, forming the largest telecom company in the country. Pretty interesting, and we will talk a little bit more about with Aamir around that. Aamir has been an instrumental member of the team that helped transform Jazz from a legacy telecom operator to being the country's largest preferred digital lifestyle player. Jazz cashed to 7 million customers and content and service ranging from music, TV to gaming and insurances. Definitely, it's all cool stuff. And last but not the least, which is very important, I think, Aamir has been working with the government. Aamir was instrumental in helping establish Pakistan's first national incubation center, a unique example of public-private partnership that was subsequently emulated across 4 cities in Pakistan. He has championed mobile financial inclusion. He served on the board of Universal Service Fund, which aims at reducing the digital divide in Pakistan. Presently, he's on several boards, including Ignite, Pakistan National Research, and Dev Fund, and Mobile Link Microfinance. So here we have Aamir. So glad to talk to you, Aamir. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So I'll start right off. Pakistan, let's talk about the telecom industry. How would you compare the telecom sector in Pakistan to its neighbor and the region in general? How do you see that, Aamir?
Oh, good. You got me started off on a tough one. Listen, we're doing good, but we're not doing great. And I'll be straight off the bat on most of these questions that you're going to ask me. We have about 80% penetration, which is impressive, but not outstanding. And the reason why I say that is that 80% means that there's still about 20% Pakistanis who don't have access to any kind of telecommunication needs. And there are areas in Pakistan so there are about 44 million people who are still deprived of their ability to make a call. Forget about whether it's 3G or 2G or 4G. So we're a little bit behind. And sometimes, while it is okay to keep on comparing yourselves with your neighbors, I think our challenge is really with ourselves. Where were we yesterday? Are we moving forward fast enough? Are we moving at the required run rate? And I think we're a little bit behind on our required run rate, and that pains me a lot.
No, that's a great thing, and just because I'm sitting here and I'm seeing so many ads in the United States, and we have a lot of audience in here. 5G is a thing here. The use of mobile, obviously, phones have increased. Meanwhile, the voice has decreased. Individuals are using data to communicate. Do you think 5G would be a thing in Pakistan? And what is your view, first of all? How do you see the business model changing in the telecom sector? But then also comment a little bit about 5G.
Sure. Before we do that, just housekeeping, a number of people saying that they can't hear, so you may want to check something over there. But I'll get on with my answer. Hopefully, these are slightly older messages. Right, so your question is around 5G. Of course, it's a much heralded topic. There are about 30 plus countries in the world which have launched commercial 5G services. And 5G becomes more relevant. It's not just a technology which offers you faster downloads or faster internet speeds. It's more about being able to connect a number of devices in a small geography. So the exponential benefit is twofold. It can have a number of devices, which goes into the Internet of Things area, where everything will get connected. And number two is that it's got very low latency. So you can basically give immediate feedback uplinks, and it comes into play when you're going into autonomous vehicles or remote surgery, things where you need precision. So, I wanted to, first of all, really clarify when we talk about 5G, it's not just an incremental technology in terms of 2G, 3G, and 3G is better than 2G and 4G is better than 3G. So it's not just a linear extrapolation of faster speeds, right? We, even in a 4G environment today, can deliver speeds consistently around the world, not necessarily here in Pakistan, which are more than 100 megabits per second. And that gives you a really good user experience if you were to just do gaming or if you were to watch movies. So when we talk about 5G, the use cases are still in their infancy. So, autonomous vehicles, remote surgery, a number of things connected to Internet of Things, but the potential is huge. Now, obviously you sooner or later will ask me, how is Pakistan's readiness on 5G, right? So we have not even remotely touched the surface of 4G in Pakistan, despite having 160 million SIMs, which probably are owned by about 110 million unique individuals out of a population of 220 million. Only about 30% of these customers are using 4G. So we have about 70 million people who are still not using whatever broadband we have in Pakistan. So when we look at a national level, while we can compete with some other environments and say we too have 5G, I think it just places a disproportionate amount of focus on something which is going to have an appeal to a very small sliver of people, right? What we need to do as a country, in my opinion, is to make sure that we leave no one behind. I spoke to you earlier about 40 odd million people who have no 2G, no 3G, no form of communication. Then we have close to about 90 million people who haven't really started using internet properly. So my focus and my advocacy within the government is that, listen, let's build our 4G to a level where we provide broadband to everybody, where we have, let's say, an ambition as a smartphone in every hand or broadband for everyone. I think that's the time when you actually start going towards more fancy and advanced technologies. I was speaking to one of my industry colleagues from South Korea, because they were one of the first countries that also launched 5G. And I asked them, at what stage did you do it? So when they launched 5G last year, the country had about 80 plus percentage penetration to have where they had 4G. In Pakistan, it is less than 30%. That's when I spoke to him. So we have a long gap to cover before we go on to 5G. That's my view on this thing.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right, Aamir? Because another thing that what I have seen over this time in the last 10, 15 years is again the pivot, changing direction of MNOs, mobile network operators. That everything used to go through what we call voice, even data, and then with the Wi-Fi, all those things, the business model is changing. I want to change a topic a little bit, and I want to talk about telecommunication sector overall, but then bringing in fintech also. Overall, there are like 5 billion individuals around the world owning and using mobile phones. Almost all the college-going students have mobile phones. They are paying via mobile applications and mobile phone consistently for different kind of services. Yet they do not have a credit history to apply for credit card. The same goes in Pakistan, I think, right? And I think you guys have done some phenomenal thing around Jazz Cash and other thing. Fintech is growing, and I'm very passionate about fintech. My thing is that I think you, as the CEO of Jazz, how do you see yourself as a differentiator? How do you see telecom marrying in with fintech? And just give me a view about that. And the user base in Pakistan, 63 million subscriber. You talked a little bit about expanding and really being available for everybody. What are you guys doing, and how do you see that from that perspective? I know it's a loaded question, a lot of things.
No, not at all. Listen, Pakistan presents a very unique kind of an opportunity in terms of first financial inclusion and payments, and then we talk about the more sophisticated fintech. So one of the travesties of Pakistan is that despite having 35 banks, which makes it a very fragmented industry, over the last 70 years, we have been able to provide financial instruments only to about 20% of the adults in Pakistan. So there is a huge gap. Our reliance on cash economy is disturbingly high. And people prefer to keep cash under their pillow and transact in that. And there are a huge number of issues with cash transactions. Corruption is one of them. The cost of transporting cash is another one. So not surprisingly, about a decade ago, Telenor and then subsequently Mobilink got banking licenses, because Pakistan is a bank-led environment as opposed to Kenya and a couple of other environments which are telco-led when it comes to providing financial inclusion. So we bought banking licenses, and you alluded to the fact that I also am the chairman of Mobilink Microfinance Bank. And the whole idea was that we will use that as a vehicle to play the game. We knew that mobiles and mobile phone penetration is going to fast overtake the banking penetration, which it did very, very, very quickly. So now what we have is a huge opportunity to make sure that anybody who has a mobile phone can be actually giving a banking account. And we do that in an intelligent manner, as you keep on saying. We have about 63, which is now actually going to be closer to 64.5 million customers. So they've already been BVS'd, biometrically verified, right? We have their antecedents. We know where they live. We know the Shanafti card number, the CNIC. So it's easy for me to open a bank account for them. And we have done that. We have now close to about 9.5 million customers who use Jazz Cash mobile account on a monthly basis. So that's our MAUs number. Those of you familiar with the terminology, I think most of you would be. So we have close to about 9.5 million MAUs on Jazz Cash. So they're basically making one transaction at least a month. Now, what are those transactions? They're either transferring money, or they're doing their mobile top up, or they're making utility bill payment, or they're making another kind of purchase using mobile money. So the opportunity is immense. The State Bank of Pakistan also has a national financial inclusion strategy of making sure that we have close to about 50 million mobile accounts in the next 3 years. Now, that's a huge target, given that there are basically two strong players, ourselves and EasyPaisa, who are spearheading this environment. And we've got, like I said, about 9.5, and EasyPaisa probably has about 6.5 million customers. So the whole burden of financial inclusion is now falling on these two quasi-fintech companies at the back of their telecom outreach. Unfortunately, the traditional banks, the 35 of them, have not been able to make their services available. And the reason is that the bricks and mortar is actually a very slow expanding environment. Collectively, all of the banks in Pakistan combined together have less than 15 or 16,000 branches. Jazz Cash alone has about 80,000 branches. And what are these branches? These are called branchless banks. These are the Kiryana stores. These are the shops where you're buying your groceries. And we, through our license of mobile branchless banking, are able to service our accounts doing their cash in and cash out, which is basically the main requirement for these things. So a huge opportunity, but it's not as sophisticated as what you may think of sitting somewhere else in the world. When you think about either Apple Pay or Google Pay, and now we're going to NFC, we are struggling to basically introduce those things, the QR codes here in Pakistan. Smartphone penetration remains a challenge. The trust in these services is going to take some time to build. We have some good examples in India where Ant came in with Paytm. We're working, and what is encouraging is that the government, and especially the State Bank governor, is quite interested in pushing this thing. So we're at the forefront of that revolution.
Aamir, I just want to follow up on that question a little bit, and I want to ask you that one of the biggest thing that I'm seeing is with through this digital economy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But the power the telecom industries like your company Jazz has around creating financial identity. What I mean by that is that, as I talked earlier about having this gigantic, across the world, if you see so many people in Pakistan alone, you have, like, as you mentioned, 64 million. They can potentially have financial identity. They can get credit out of it. So not only distributing cash, but creating the credit history via having all those information. Is Pakistan working any, or are you doing anything where you can potentially create, I'll use the word financial identity, the word, anything around that, any work that is being done around that with the telecom and the State Bank and others?
So I'm not sure if it's necessarily financial identity, but definitely you become more sophisticated, knowing more about your customers. And the whole world of analytics is really about getting to know more and more about your customer. We know who our customers are. So the KYC thing, we know where they live, we know where do they go on internet, exactly. We know how much they travel. There's a scary amount of data that you have in terms of its volume. The challenge always is how to make sense of it. How do you transform that data into information, and information into insights, and useful insights, actionable ones. It also serves as a purpose of creating a credit scoring model, right? So you talked about lending, and we are also going into nano lending. We are going into non-securitized lending based on the calling patterns of a customer, knowing who else is working with that customer or is friends with them, the type of handset they're using, right? So we give almost instant loans on Jazz Cash, distributed in less than 30 seconds, up to the amount of, I think it's 5,000 rupees. So we are carrying out a pilot on that. And there are 200,000 customers who are availing that thing. So these are the kind of things that we're working on. And by establishing a pattern of who pays for or who repays their loan at the right time, you start establishing that what you're calling is digital identity, and what I'm calling is enriched data about customers that can be used across different platforms. So
Yeah,
there's a
no,
lot of, and I don't know about the whole country, but certainly for us, as we pivot from being a legacy telecom company to somebody who's in technology, and when we see our future, it's more around data. So we are building our data lakes, and we are trying to enrich in our organization by going on a real estate data buildup. And that's where the next journey of Jazz is going to be.
Fascinating, because Aamir, I truly believe that we are living in this digital economy, and data is the new oil. And as you said, that there is a lot of data, but how do you refine that data? That's where the value is. Just like you refine oil into octane and higher, whatever you want to put in the car, it is defining the power of data, is refining the data. So yeah, I would love to see how
Can I just joke about that for a minute? I used to say that data is the new oil. Actually, I think data is the new water, because what COVID told us was that oil is quite useless if you stop traveling. So oil became quite worthless. Water is needed for survival. And I think data is the new water.
I like it. Talking about COVID, let's talk about COVID a little bit. Pakistan, obviously, there was actually this morning, I saw some very positive actually comment on CNN by one of the previous secretaries here in the US, talking about if US had done something similar to what Pakistan has done.
Seen screenshots of that. It's doing the rounds here in Pakistan. It's Fareed Zakriya's show.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So, again, on a more serious note, Jazz and what you guys are doing is phenomenal, from an industry perspective. Tell me the journey of COVID. March happens, all this thing happens. And again, how is everybody doing in Pakistan? But two, from a business perspective, how do you see it? And as a business leader, tell me a little bit about COVID and how did you handle that? From an economy perspective, but also from a company culture perspective, right? You are the CEO of a very large company. Let's talk about that. I think it's an important topic right now.
Glad you asked, because I think we were quite involved. I would say, and I don't want to sound like Trump, but nobody did more in COVID than we did. So I don't want to use words like that. But we were in the middle of it right from the start. We shut down our offices a week before. There were lockdowns, so we did a mandatory work from home. That gave us some time to get prepared to make sure that our systems are all working. We also recognize that as soon as there are lockdowns, there will be greater reliance on digital. Our data will surge. So we anticipated that not only ourselves, but also looking at the pattern of other countries. I started engaging with the government very quickly in terms of making sure that telecom is declared as essential services, because in lockdowns, we still have to service our customers. We still have to be able to maintain the network. So that took some effort in convincing. We made sure that we have added more capacity, because we did recognize that data would explode and voice will go down. So we had to not only provide more data, but we had to provide it into areas where we thought that the customers are going to move. So in Lahore, about 30% of the customers or population from Lahore moved outwards. There were a lot of learnings, but right in the heart of all this thing, in addition to our CSR initiatives, where we worked a lot with government, we contributed close to about 1.2 billion or $7-8 million in the COVID relief funds, both through our products and in terms of building up the ventilator ecosystem, the masks and number of other things that the country was struggling to acquire at that time. Leave that aside. We also worked very closely as a telecom industry to help what was our National Command and Operations Center with very useful data where they could actually identify the customers, they could identify the patient. Frequently, you must have heard a lot about smart lockdowns, and while it is debatable and many people are going to be dismissive, first of all, Pakistan is doing relatively well, and I hope it stays that way. But I met with Asad Umar about 2-3 weeks ago, and he's the person who's the tour de force behind our COVID relief efforts. And I asked him point blank, what do you think was different between us and many other countries? And he talked about TTQ, which was test, trace, and quarantine. And for that, one of the important elements was the information that we had from a telecom perspective, and how we were sharing that through PTA, which is the telecom regulator. So whenever somebody came for a test, they knew the mobile phone number, they knew the CNIC, and again, we could actually identify where exactly would that person reside at night. And that's where we started creating these hubs. And that is when we finally started doing smart lockdowns. So a cell, we can basically identify where a cell is moving. That's how cellular works. And where the person resides at night is their home. So we were able to identify this thing, and this critical information sharing and making use of that information actually helped us with the smart lockdowns. And then the second part is, of course, debatable whether these were effective lockdowns or not. But that's what the telecom industry did right from the start, in terms of not only making sure that our customers who relied more on telecom for their information needs, for their communication needs, for their safety needs, but also working hand in glove with the government in terms of identifying the smart lockdown areas.
That's fascinating, and there's certain things in there which you mentioned, which I think we cannot do it here in the US, i.e. Keeping, but that's great that if that can be done in Pakistan, that's awesome. The vaccines are not coming anytime soon. So is there a role for telecom, companies like yourself or businesses, I would say overall in Pakistan, to continue with the work that you guys have started and perhaps even expand and come out with some innovative things? And again, this is where some of those entrepreneur things comes into shape also, that are there anything that you see, because COVID will be here for a while, can telecom or anyone else can help in there?
Yeah. We are helping in many ways, but not perhaps necessarily in helping find a vaccine. There are peripheral ways where you can help as an industry, as a company. We have done what we could. So, one of the biggest challenges was providing online education facilities. Now, again, this goes back to 40% of our population is not covered. And then yet another 20% is perhaps not in a 4G area. And then we had to add more capacity. So we may not necessarily be helping directly in the medical area, other than the test, trace, and quarantine thing. But we're certainly an important ingredient in finding solutions to many other things, right? E-commerce, payments, those are the things that we're facilitating by the nature of what we do. But certainly one of the areas where we got a little bit more pulled into was all this pressure from the students and from their parents on, okay, what do? We don't really have a whole bunch of great ed tech platforms. So we went from everything as basic as teachers recording lectures on WhatsApp and disseminating to something more sophisticated, right? And we came up with an app which was called Jazz Paro. Again, we were, thrown in with challenges that the country was not really prepared for. I don't think any country was prepared for, whether it's from a medical perspective. And those countries which had slightly better entrepreneurial environments were able to pivot and create products sooner, and I have to admit, than we did ourselves. Our online transactions did increase, but we still had a broken e-commerce layer on which we could have built. So I'm glad to see the number of transactions going up, but we're still relying on cash on delivery. And at that stage, there was a risk around cash and banknotes being transmitters of these viruses also. So it highlighted, more than ever, the need on having a good, solid, robust digital infrastructure. And I think finally, for many people in the government, the penny finally dropped. And they now look at it as something which is an essential part of our future, rather than some foreign companies coming and milking telecom services out of Pakistan and taking dividends out. I think I've seen a change in thinking in some important stakeholders in the last 2 or 3 months in terms of how they look at telecom, because for many people, telecom is still, having SIMs, building towers. They don't see that transition. And quite honestly, the transition will take some time to be more evident. But I think it's we're still stuck in looking at telecom, the old-fashioned telecom 2.0 kind of world.
So tell me a little bit about, Aamir, that what area or sector, I would say, of the economy in Pakistan excite you the most, and why? Is it the telecom? Is it something else? And again, talk to me a little bit about in the challenges or what could make it better? How can actually companies or which sector can do better if something is done or if something is being done to actually change that?
Right. So if I look at the national challenges, right?
Yeah.
We need to have a vibrant economy. We need to end corruption. We need to empower people. We need to make sure that there is better education, right? So a number of these things, again, I go back that our infrastructure is the foundation. Every industry, not just telecom, every industry will have a tech suffix. Finance becomes fintech, agriculture becomes agri-tech, education becomes edtech, advertisement, ad tech, and so on, right? So what we're doing at a basic level in terms of providing greater connectivity, whether it's through fiber or 4G or whatever way, is already going to help many other industries. However, you asked me, where am I most excited about? So this is basically still same telecom, doing more of it, going to greater number of destinations, rolling out more number of kilometers of fiber and putting in more towers, right? And it will help many other environments. It will help many other industries. However, I think payments, digital finance, building that ecosystem is now the biggest opportunity. So I get more excited about, how do we empower 1 million small, medium, micro enterprises to be able to sell their wares more effectively across Pakistan and then eventually outside of Pakistan also. So, there is this tendency that I see many a times that we always wait for either FDI, foreign bahar se aana chahiye, FDI aana chahiye. Why not local investment, right? When we think about tourism, कि जी बाहर से टूरिस्ट आएगा यार, पाकिस्तान के अंदर 200 मिलियन बंदे हैं, उनको भी satisfy करो. I hope it's okay to speak in Urdu. I hope
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Customers, colleagues would be able to do that. So we also have to recognize that this is a fairly big economy. There's a fairly big population, and we also have to think about doing commerce for within Pakistan, right? You add. If a chappal wala in Mardan can sell his, shoes more effectively to Karachi, that's just as good. We don't have to always wait for PayPal, right? There are so many red herrings over here that annoy me a lot, and they say, okay, what will we do unless FDI comes in and there is no PayPal, and therefore there can be no e-commerce over here. There are so many low-hanging fruits that we need to focus on and very carefully avoid these red herrings.
So that's a good segue into another topic that I want to talk about, which is very dear and near to my friends here in the Silicon Valley, which is the startup ecosystem, right? And I frankly, I truly believe, Aamir, that the MNOs, the telecom companies, they are the network orchestrators into or sort of the Uber, if you will, but a more powerful Uber to actually drive fintechs, to drive digital identity, to drive all these things. Jazz has been, was one of the first telecom companies to set up an accelerator program for startups in Pakistan. How do you see this whole startup, not only in telecom, but I see you as a network orchestrator. Talk to me a little bit about how do you see that as in Pakistan, and with, folks sitting here in the Valley, connect the dots for them a little bit in there.
Okay. So Pakistan's incubation environment or entrepreneurial environment is still in its infancy. When I came back to Pakistan about 5 years ago, I think there were a few things that were really high on my agenda. One of them was digitalizing the organization and transforming it from a legacy to a more modern digital environment. And at many stages, I didn't know what digital meant or what do we want to be. All I knew was that we can't be what we are. And we have to do something different, right? Yeah. And under that broad umbrella, everything becomes digital, and it's one of the most overused words in digital transformation, and everybody's going through it, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to be honest, I had no clue. All I knew was that status quo, we won't survive. So we did look around, and then I decided to set up an incubation center in Pakistan. Around the same time, the minister at that time, Anusha Rahman, was very keen that we do a public-private partnership. And then I came across a couple of my ex-colleagues, Parvez Abbasi and Zuhair Khalik, who were also wanting to give something back to the country. So we teamed up with this company, and interestingly enough, their name is Team Up. And then we worked with the government to form what is now called National Incubation Center. And while I was quite financially okay to do that on my own, I have now in hindsight realized that in matters like this, it is your partnership that really works. And through our partnership with government, it sent the signal that a big company like Mobilink or Jazz subsequently was willing to come and work with the government. I think that was an important thing in a public-private partnership. Secondly, I don't think Jazz had the competence of running an incubation center on its own. So we found a dedicated team who puts in, a huge number of hours every single day to make sure that we have a great accelerator program. We have the right quality of incubators and the right number. And then there is a mentoring program around that. So this was one of the first things that we did. Now, subsequently there, as you mentioned also in the intro, and thank you for that, there have been 4 national incubation centers set up in the rest of the country. There is Nest in Karachi, there is something else in Lahore. I forget the number, but there are close to about 35 odd incubation centers or accelerators. Now, the second obvious question is, okay, where are the unicorns, right? And what's the missing thing, right? Why haven't we come up with Skype, or why aren't we like Estonia or somewhere else? I don't know the answer to that. I know a number of things that haven't worked, and there are some structural things, initially a lot of our founders are wasting their time incorporating a company rather than fixing the product, right? So we need to give them certain stacks, this is the legal stack, this is the financial payment stack, this is this stack, and your contribution and your time and energy should really be spent on defining what the customer needs, filling that gap, working on the UI, UX. And I think this is probably our 8th or 9th cohort. We have, there are about 180 odd businesses or startups that have come through the National Incubation Center here in Islamabad. So I think we are getting better with every cohort. And that's the quality of work, that we see is I wouldn't call it mind-blowing by what we have seen in the rest of the world, but the challenges in Pakistan, and I go back to the relevance of our solutions, I think it has to be quite germane to the environment. But I see a significant difference between where we started 4 years ago to where we are in terms of what we have learned, in terms of what we are capable to give back to these incubators and to the startups.
I think it's when you talk about incubators and we talk about startups, it's always about, to me, it's always about the journey. And the journey, if it's pivoting towards the right direction, and as long as it's moving towards the right direction, even if it's slow, I think it's the right move. And another thing that I say, Aamir, that I think you touched upon multiple times is that we have transformed from industrial economy to the digital economy. And the biggest difference in there, in my opinion, in the industrial economy was more about seller having more power to the digital economy where buyer has all the power. And therefore, and I come back to the fintechs, and I come back to the network orchestrators, and I come back to these marketplaces, which is becoming so powerful. So it's a new way of thinking, in my opinion. We have got a lot of questions, but before I started asking questions from our friends from Pakistan, as well as here from US and Canada, I wanted to ask a couple of more questions very quickly, and if you can, would Jazz acquire a startup if it is a right fit? As you're working with the National Incubation Center, or what is your strategy as a CEO of how do you see that? And do you do acquisitions and so on forth?
Sure. We acquired Varid a few years ago, but that's a big acquisition.
Yeah, that's a very big.
In this startup environment, so the setup that we have through the National Incubation Center, we are allowed to invest in those companies. We haven't created a vehicle, but we are thinking about whether that vehicle should be created here or at a parent company level. And I'm in direct dialogue. So we have Beyond Ventures, which also looks at opportunities, and there might be similarity in the challenge being overcome, and we may pick something up and incorporate it in either Amsterdam or London. and that services 10 markets rather than, well, could be global, rather than just Pakistan. Or if we think something is peripheral to what we do as a business, then we can just have that thing here in Pakistan.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you touched upon a very important point, Aamir, which is about the dependence on this quote unquote FDI and how can you do fuel domestic VC funds. I think there is a lot of things, and before I now go on to asking questions, one last question from me. This is really fascinating. Actually, we should have more time to talk about it. Is you know, how can you fuel domestic VC funding? Is there a way to do that? And because what I see is that some of the news that I've seen, which is great, there's nothing wrong with it, but I've seen that some of the fundings that has happened has been from an international market versus domestic market. So is there a room, or is there a market for a domestic VC funds in Pakistan? I'm just raising it up because here in Silicon Valley, that's a big thing, right? So what's your view on that?
You guys are the entrepreneurs there in the Valley, and you're a lot more familiar with this language terminology. But I think, and I'm certainly not an expert, not even qualified to answer that question fully. But what I think is missing is that we don't have the ecosystem, the ease with which companies can be incorporated, how you will see the exit. That's why a number of these companies are still incorporated out of Pakistan. We have to work on that fundamental layer. And it's going to be a leap of faith. Just like I started में आपसे कह रहा था कि the penny has finally dropped in the government in terms of the importance of this digital Pakistan, or whatever you may call it. I think even for the local investors and people who do provide angel funding initially, I think अभी तक वो mentality सही तरह change नहीं हुई. इतनी transactions नहीं होती, इतना हमें मालूम नहीं है कि मैं इसमें घुस जाऊँ. It's just a leap of faith. You can, you know, it's basically the usual suspects. So that ecosystem, and it's a chicken and egg situation, right? Companies आएंगी, कुछ exits होनी शुरू होंगी. ये सवाल मुझसे बार-बार पूछा जाता है कि देखें जी, बाहर से पैसे लेके आए, बाहर से लोग इन्वेस्ट करें, क्योंकि उधर हमें पता है कि ट्रांजैक्शन किस तरह होती है, सीरीज एक किस तरह प्लेस करेंगे, आप किस तरह करेंगे. वो सारी की सारी जो वोकैबुलरी है ना, वो यहाँ अभी थोड़ी सी कमजोर है. और exits और उसमें how do you monetize, that I think is still lacking. The ideation part is getting better. The technology part is getting better. The UI, UX, and solving real quantifiable problems and where the gaps are, I think there we have all improved a lot. What is still missing is that ecosystem that supports the incubation.
ठीक है जी. So let me now very quickly go on to questions, because we are in the last 15 minutes of our discussion. Fascinating, by the way, Aamir. This is for me, this is awesome. So this is a question from Pakistan. I'll start with Pakistan. Name is Sarah Heather, and she's asking, why do all startups fail after first year in Pakistan? Any view on that? Kya reason hai?
I'm not sure if I agree with the assessment. I don't know where she pulled up that stat.
Yeah, so maybe
listen, around the world, and it's not just here in Pakistan, around the world, 90% of the startups fail, right? So
I agree.
By nature, it's a high risk, high reward, or maybe it's just a generally high risk thing. High reward is few and far in between. But we've talked a little bit about what is lacking. So we can house them in an incubator for a while, handhold for about a year, give some accelerator support subsequently if we believe in it. It's really about the commitment of the founder and the startup team to weather it out. So first of all, I wouldn't say that everybody fails in 1 year, because we're still dealing with many people, many of our startups that started about 3 years ago. So I know for a fact that not everybody fails in 1 year. But in this environment, there's a very high, if I remember correctly, it's about 90% of the startups fail around the world.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's the number here also. So to Sarah, even in the US, that's the number, and you have to have the, really have to be very patient and try and keep trying, and it's, that's the thing that I guess do. I'll go to US now and ask a question from Hina Zafar. You talked about e-commerce and on online front. Okay, so the question is really that, is there anything Alibaba or Amazon, Pakistan that exists or is underway? So it's talking about marketplace, which I think is a very important question, that is there anything that is being done to create a marketplace, again, to, and again, going back to the word that I used earlier, Aamir, about network orchestrator. Can Jazz be that network orchestrator for the marketplaces? Can they bring?
I thought about this thing a lot, the whole e-commerce thing. And then we had to really narrow our ambitions into area where we can be more effective in contributing. So e-commerce, right? It has marketplace, it has fulfillment, it has payments, right? Marketplace is relatively easy. You put the skin, the UI, UX. The difficult part is really having the warehousing thing, knowing what needs to be sent, the fulfillment around that thing, right? There are companies which are doing that. Daraz is here in Pakistan. We know a few others which are going into this environment. And the last component is the payment thing, right? And I think that's the area where we are trying to play our part as Jazz and Jazz Cash, where we make smooth transactions. First of all, as I told you, we have about 10 million customers. We're now also distributing credit and debit cards. So that's the area where we want to make seamless transactions possible. But yes, there is activity over there. Unfortunately, there are not too many platforms doing e-commerce. I think Daraz definitely is the biggest. There was Yevo by TCS till about a couple of years ago. But I think overall, whether Amazon will come over here, I don't know. I don't know how high are we on their pecking order or excitement order. Ant Financial has already invested in a bank here, our competitor, Telenor Bank. So there is excitement coming over here. But like I said, आपने शुरू में पूछा था कि how satisfied are you when you look around your peers? I think हम required run rate से काफी पीछे हैं, खास तौर पे e-commerce के ऊपर. लेकिन जो challenges Jazz हल कर सकता है, वो कर रहा है.
Awesome. I'll go back to a question from Pakistan. Mohammad Ali Sahab se hai ye कि what is more important, a rich private sector or a strong public sector, if you had to choose? क्या कहेंगे आमिर आप इस बारे में? You can quickly.
I think Winnie the Pooh, you know, like I want to have my cake and eat it too. So दोनों चीजें चाहिए. Small private sector, you don't want to be completely profiteering because, you know, like that thing about unless you have that long-term view, you know, the rich private sector may have non-aligned views with what the country needs. You do need at all given times robust policies, strong government coordination. And I'd just say it's a public-private partnership that eventually is the most important thing, or the more important one.
Makes sense. I'm trying to, because we have a lot of questions, so I'll try to combine a couple of questions. So this is a question from Valley by the gentleman Mashood and then Rashid, and I'm kind of combining, and so please, you know, I'll ask both the questions together. So the first question is, what would it take for Pakistani large businesses like Jazz to become globally recognized brands? So are you thinking about actually expanding in that sense to the neighboring countries, to the region, and so on forth? And the second part is, I think, is an attachment to that. Okay, Aamir, staying on positive side, what are some of the unique advantages of Pakistan in terms of people, resources, and even the startups, the ecosystem? So, क्या Pakistan Jazz जैसी company expand हो सकती है, or what are the positive things about Pakistan, if you may?
Okay. So absolutely. First of all, our ambition is to be a world-class company. We may not have 5 different ventures by the name of Jazz in other parts of the world. That is not on the cards. But certainly, we can be a world-class company and be written about in HBR and whatever else. So we are trying to create that thing. But there are aspects of what we are getting into where we could be global. And those are the things that we just talked about, right? These are the OTTs have no boundaries. They have no national boundaries. If we are in a position to help invest, create an app or fulfill a customer need that is in Pakistan, but could also be somewhere else in the world. So we will become global, right? But from a telecom perspective, that is not on the cards. Second, आपका सवाल ये था कि what are the positives? अच्छा, positives को highlight करने की एक I have to go into the negative to highlight the positive.
बिल्कुल जी हाँ.
क्योंकि situation इतनी exciting नहीं है. हमारी infancy में बहुत सारी चीजें हैं, तो opportunity बहुत बड़ी है. Our starting point is low, therefore our upside is exponential, right? There is more hunger. I have come back to Pakistan 3 times. Every time I've been more excited than the previous one in terms of how I've looked at the environment, regardless of the challenges. And there are those challenges, and every year the number of Pakistanis, they ask me, "Yaar, should I come to Pakistan? Is this a good time?" It is never a good time, and it is always a great time. So that answer, you have to, go with a little bit of a gut and a little bit of a mind. लेकिन अपॉर्चुनिटीज हमारे मुल्क में इसलिए ज़्यादा हैं क्योंकि स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट्स कम हैं. ई कॉमर्स की हमने बात की थी, फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज की. I could not have created Jazz Cash in the US. That's a given. So from that perspective, there are many more opportunities over here. And especially in the technology field, I think we're not even scratching the surface.
No, that's a great answer, Aamir. And this is a question from Syed Noman, somewhere here in the US. Interesting question, and I'll just summarize it, and I'll ask this question to you, KG. So I'll ask my question also, because this is KG. And again, the digital economy that we are living in, there is one big aspect in there, which is partnership and alliances. तो नमान साहब पूछते हैं कि जी इंडिया में and other places there are a lot of Verizon packages and Jio packages and AT&T packages. Are you creating, or Jazz or Telecom in general, with some outside companies, so that folks coming in from US, when they come to Pakistan, they have better packages, and in that way you may also actually have a reciprocating thing कि जी कोई Jazz customer US आता है, so they may have a better package when they come here. Are you guys thinking about that from a partnership and alliance perspective?
The quick answer is no, because it's a very small market, and the Pakistanis who come over here, they prefer to buy a local Jazz connection, which is going to be 1/10 the cost of whatever AT&T would be able to offer them. And the comparison between us and India is slightly different because in the last 6 months, nobody has traveled to anywhere. And secondly, the number of roamers that we have in Pakistan is minuscule compared to India. So I have to put my energy and resources in products which are more relevant to the greater number of our customers. So the quick answer is no.
Okay, so here's
and let me just answer one other question. Somebody said कि जी आप broadband आगे क्यों नहीं बढ़ा रहे और बाकी मुल्कों में सस्ता है. Let me just tell you कि पाकिस्तान में third cheapest environment है broadband की. So like after India and Israel, we have about, and you guys living in the US would have a better idea कि आपकी क्या चीजें हैं. हमारी 22 cents equivalent of a gigabyte है. So आप अपने उधर packages देख लें कि आप लोगों को उधर AT&T और Verizon क्या दे रहा है. So
I was about to ask you that. No, that's a good answer.
And sadly, let me also tell you, we are amongst the highest taxed telecom environments. क्योंकि किसी एक और ने सवाल पूछा था जो मैं आपके पढ़ रहा हूँ Q&A के ऊपर, उसमें यह सवाल था कि जी ब्रॉडबैंड बढ़ाने के लिए क्या कर सकते हैं. So we can make it slightly more cheaper because the government currently captures about 30% of the revenue that we collect from the customer. That goes into withholding taxes, and that goes into the general sales tax. And that prohibits the greater proliferation of broadband in Pakistan, which is not a good sign when you want to be digital Pakistan.
And talking about digital Pakistan, let's talk a little bit about difficulty also, because we cannot move forward without asking difficult questions. तो ये एक साहब ने पूछा है question कि जी Karachi, for example, has 12 hours electricity outages. How does that prohibit digital businesses and emerging in Pakistan? And are there any alternates? Is there anything being done around that? How do you see that? I'm sure it's just not Karachi. It's the outages are everywhere.
Actually, things had quite honestly improved. We are producing a lot of electricity. The national grid still has its own issues in terms of reliance of that electricity to be sent from one place to the other. The collections will always remain a challenge. But in terms of production and our peak hour requirement, we were producing, and we had pretty much seen I would say not the end of outages, but seen it substantially reduced. Of course, all of your colleagues and audiences would have seen what happened in Karachi about a month ago. अच्छा, इस किस्म की चीज़ें हैं जिसमें सारी बिजनेसेस इम्पैक्ट होती हैं, सारी जिंदगियां इम्पैक्ट हो गई थी, बड़ा नुकसान हुआ लोगों का। और हमारे से भी बड़ी तवक्कुआत थी, एक्सपेक्टेशंस थी, और ज़्यादातर लोगों को पता चला कि उनकी ज़िंदगी में वाईफाई और इंटरनेट कितना अहम है। सो हमें भी बहुत बड़ा बीच में बुरा भला कहा गया कि भाई आपका फ़ोन सर्विस नहीं चल रही 2-3 दिन से। अब समझाने की ये बात है कि फ़ोन सर्विस चलाने के लिए भी आपको बिजली चाहिए होती है,
जी
और अगर
बिल्कुल।
मेरी बैकअप पावर जो है वो एक बैटरी पे होती है, और उसकी बैकअप पावर होती है जनरेटर की। तो जो बैटरी है वो भी 2-3 घंटे के बाद बंद हो जाती है, और जनरेटर जो है वो भी 24 घंटे के बाद बंद हो जाता है। सो ये एक ऐसी चीज़ है कि जिसमें आपकी हमेशा रिलायंस रहेगी इलेक्ट्रिसिटी के ऊपर। एंड यू मस्ट हैव रेड दैट देयर आर प्लान्स टू रिवैम्प कराची विद ऑल इट्स इश्यूज, whether that happens in our lifestyles, life spans or not, I don't know. But that is a known problem, and unfortunately not something that as telco we can fix. Jazz has ambitions, but it has no ambitions being a power provider.
Awesome. So now that we have about 3 minutes left, anything, Aamir, that you want to bring up and talk to our friends, especially here in the US of, I think one thing, as you can say, that we all, even though most of us have become Americans here and whatnot and been living here for many years, we have a saying here that we bleed green. We still bleed green. तो जो पाकिस्तानी हैं यहाँ, पाकिस्तानी अमेरिकन हैं, पाकिस्तानी कनेडियंस हैं, how can they contribute back? And it's not about being, it's like how can we be enablers? There's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of things. आप incubation center आप लोग ने start किया. What is that connect? I'm a big guy of connecting the dots. So what can we do to connect the dot between the talent here and the talent in Pakistan, and what is in your opinion, what is the best way to do that?
So at the risk of sounding too nationalistic and patriotic, because I also bleed green, we have both a product issue and an image issue. And image issue is around the world. And like if we take that approach of being Pakistani first, certainly helps. And I'm not talking to only the audience which is here, but generally, that despite our many challenges, and we have challenges, no doubt about them, right? Everything is a challenge these days. But some unreasonable positivity is required. It can't be rational. So if you bleed green, then that's the color of your blood. So show respect to that, and don't ask too many questions कि यार ये ऐसे होएगा, वो होएगा, ये बंदा ठीक है, वो है corrupt है, etc. नहीं, कोई फायदा नहीं है. Be boundless in your optimism to the point of being completely nonsensical. उसके अलावा ये चीज़ ठीक होने वाली नहीं है. किसके मुल्क में मसले नहीं होते? हमारे मुल्क में हम मसलों के बारे में ज़्यादा बात करते हैं और स्केप्टिसिज्म के थ्रू हम चलते रहते हैं, और हर चीज़ में हमारी एक कंस्पिरेसी थ्योरी. अगर कंस्पिरेसी थ्योरीज कोई ओलंपिक्स का स्पोर्ट होता तो हमारे गोल्ड मेडल्स ही ना खत्म होते. लेकिन कभी आगे बढ़ना है, ठीक है, और हम आगे नहीं बढ़ सकते. वी कांट डबल पैडल, having a foot on the accelerator and another on the brake. Yes, but I want to do this, I want to invest in Pakistan, but I don't know, यार पैसा लेके भाग जाएगा. I don't know, शायद लेके भाग जाए, शायद ना लेके भागे. What you can do is, especially those who are in the entrepreneurial environment, there are a number of startups. They need real help from people who know a little bit different, a little bit better, a little bit closer to the valley. They need mentoring, not always money. They need a sparring partner. So if you guys have the time, inclination, interest, please look at the various opportunities, the various ideas. Certainly at National Incubation Center, Islamabad, I can be a source and happy to connect the people with opportunities. So I'm happy to do that. लेकिन देखें, पॉजिटिव रहना जो है ना वो मस्ट है, और अगर आप वो रखेंगे, and if you really want to help, there are a number of people who are actually looking for mentorship and for a little bit of a pat on the back that you're on the right track.
Excellent. So I think we are at top of the hour. Aamir, this has been a pleasure for me. Really, really enjoyed the discussion. I think there's so many positives out of this. And as you said, in like anything, you have to maneuver through and take detours to actually get to the point, to the winning point. And of course, there are difficulties, there are challenges. but we need to be patient and do that. And I think with the community here, the expats here, the entrepreneur mindset, I think we can really do a lot of fun stuff. It has been a pleasure. Thanks to Open, thanks to you guys, Jazz. It's been my pleasure to be hosting this. And thank you very much. Have a great day.
I loved being here, Asif. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope it was useful for your audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. So Farhan, I don't know, should I just, I don't know if you're there, should we just close at this time, or if you want to say any goodbyes?
Sure, absolutely. No, thank you so much, Aamir. This has been a wonderful experience for us, and I'm sure it is very valuable for our audience here as well. Asif, thank you so much for hosting this webinar today. I'm sure people learned a lot. There are so many questions that are on our mind. The questions are still coming up. I wish we could answer all those questions, but we have very little time. We hope to have Aamir back sometime in future. We will plan for that. And Asif, we would love you to also come back. For all of those who are the winners of our membership, one-on-one conversations with Asif or one-on-one conversations with Silicon Valley-backed VC startup founder, they will receive confirmation emails later today. So please keep a lookout. And with that, I would say thank you so much, and everybody have an awesome day.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Aamir. Thank you, Farhan.
दुनिया को बता दो।